Thank you, Andreas. Thanks for inviting me here. I think you invited me because I've been working on participation. The post-digital is completely new to me. That's the reason why I'm here, because I want to learn something from you too. And this topic of the digital technologies in participatory research happened to me. I didn't seek it out. It happened to me through Corona. And this is what I'm going to talk about today with you, that I'm going to share some of my work, I'm going to talk about about my understanding of participatory research approaches, because there are so many out there that it's, I think, important to really situate one's own understanding and approach in this larger context. And then I'll talk about some of the principles of the approach that I've been working with, or that has influenced me a lot, CBPR, community-based participatory research, and I will share challenges. I really enjoyed the cruise just now. Thanks all the organizers for organizing it. That was really cool. And I loved the first question. I think it was from you on failure. You're going to see a lot of failure and challenges in here. It's one of the mottos that I've really started to embrace a bit more, that we really have to learn from our own problems and mistakes. But at the same time, we discussed it at our table, that it's very difficult to talk about failure when you do collaborative work, because it never just refers to you. It also, like the other people who have been part of your collaboration, if you label it as a failure, people can get offended, might feel devalued. So it's a really difficult thing to do, but it's my personal understanding. The Reflection Lab article that you just mentioned is exactly that we give space to looking at difficulties in order to be able to learn from it. And we have to, I believe, especially when we want to change, when we don't just want to create insights and understanding, but if we want to change social reality, we have some ambitions, we have ideals, we have utopian visions maybe. The chances of failing are so much higher. So I think it's important to be real there. And so I'm going to try to draw some lessons, and I'm counting on you to help me with a post-digital perspective on it maybe. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. Andreas, how much time do I have?
We have all in all 1 hour, I guess.
Okay, so I'm going to try and not exceed 30 minutes so that we have more time, yeah? So I'm sorry for these huge slides. I'm not used to these wonderful big screens where you have just, you can, put much more in. If I had known, I would put much more bullet points, because these are only some of the approaches. Action research, most of you who work in educational science might know Aktionsforschung im Deutschen, still a very widely used approach, and also in learning in classrooms and improving the practice mainly of teachers traditionally, but not limited to that. Practitioners research is a term used in social work as well, where social work practitioners basically combine their practice with research. Inclusive research, emancipatory research are approaches mainly from disability studies, where people living with disabilities who have a long tradition of activism, of saying nothing about me, without me, have really developed that methodology. Transformative research and transdisciplinary research are terms that are used in sustainability studies a lot. So you can see that a lot of these approaches are situated in different fields of study and disciplines. Citizen science is the new en vogue term that is being funded at the moment quite a lot. In my understanding, it mainly comes, but not exclusively comes, from nature studies, and it entails really fantastic things like, we can all contribute to a mosquito atlas, or counting squirrels in cities, and basically help collecting data and participating in terms of like joining in the data collection sphere. But the ones at the bottom that have influenced me more, they have a different agenda too. People are not just meant to join in somehow in the data collection, but also in the conceptualization of research, in the analysis stage, in the dissemination stage. So participatory action research, if you compare it to action research, from the studies that I know, is a bit more critical, has a more normative edge in terms of also having an idea of social justice in society. So if a teacher would maybe do an action research project in his or her classroom, a participatory action research project in schools would also mainly include the students, those who are less empowered as compared to teachers in that setting, maybe, but also neighbors and other groups. And community-based participatory research is an approach that has been developed in Northern America in health sciences, which is where I'm located, and I've done a lot of work on HIV and other illnesses, but also on health promotion. And this is where this approach has been flourishing in the last 20 to 30 years, and many, many more. I think you heard about design studies and participatory design yesterday. There's collaborative ethnography and. So you add to that. So CBPR, that's a quote from 2001 from one of the large funders. And they say, well, community-based participatory research in health is a collaborative approach to research that equitably involves all partners. That's a big challenge in the process, and recognizes the unique strengths that each brings. There's another definition of CBPR, of participatory research, that talks about participatory research being like jazz, where everyone brings their own expertise, their own voice, and it's basically the coming together of different expertises and with a lot of space for improvisation that makes it work. So CBPR, and that's the difficulty for most of us academics, begins not with a topic of importance to academia, but with a research topic of importance to the community, with the aim of combining knowledge and action and now you have the normative edge for social change to improve community health and eliminate health disparities. So, this is my slide that's usually too full, too crowded, but here it just works fine because we have so much space. So I can't go into all of these. These are the principles of CBPR that Barbara Israel and colleagues from the US have written a book about, but I'm going to use this tool now. Look at it. I love it, yeah. I want to address these couple. I recognize community as a unity of identity. That's quite difficult to do in Germany because we have this translation issues. How do you translate community in Germany? You have a whole political context of the idea of community, Gemeinschaft, being politically abused by the National Socialists, where basically this the aspect of any type of community being socially constructed and imagined up to a certain degree really creates a lot of skepticism towards it. Yet, which is why I often use the English term community, and the German version would be lebensweltliche Gemeinschaft, which we try to then find partners in. So we work with that term, and as a unit of identity. Defined by those who are part of it, so from inside, not from the outside. It builds on, let me do this again, it builds on strengths and resources within the community. This is a really important issue. We all get funded for defining and describing problems everywhere, right? So I work in the area of migration and health. So if you start to define problems everywhere, you're basically buying into framing of the whole topic of migration as a problem, of migrants as somehow deficit, and we don't want to do this. We really want to be very attentive to strengths and resources within those communities that are affected by inequalities and problems and difficulties, but it's a very important perspective that makes this approach also attractive to the community partners. Yeah. Now, we try to facilitate equitable partnerships in all research phases. That's also really difficult for academics to have partners from A to Z with decision-making power, deciding what is the issue that we want to study, what is the question we want to pursue, what are the methods we want to use, and we have to do a lot of translation from academic discourse to more lay discourses or other professional discourse, in order to really to enable partnerships in these research phases. Then promotes co-learning and capacity building among our partners. Again, also as researchers, we have to do a lot of learning, and we have to do a lot of skill building in order to be able to speak in ways that people can understand what we want, what we're trying to say. We have to learn to unlearn. There's a lot of post and decolonial thought that reminds us that we have to learn to listen. The learning that needs to take place in communities involves, for example, peer researcher trainings, but also any kind of processes where people are actually given a chance to come together and empower themselves to wanting to have a voice and a say in the matter. The process of actually coming together and establishing a partnership and working together in participatory ways, that's a very big primary task. If this doesn't happen, any type of the research that might be, any type of data that might be collected is really not worth much if the process has not been characterized by some type of community building, capacity building, empowerment, and co-learning. And then the last one achieves a balance between research and action for the mutual benefit of all partners. That's for us academics who have to find a job in academia. As a doctoral student, as a postdoc, I found a job, thank God, but it was really, really hard if you are doing research where you cater to different audiences. So you have these colleagues who just do secondary analysis on sub-data or so, and they put out one paper after the other, and you're like struggling to establish relationships, right? So the balance and the benefit is, on the one hand, for all partners, really, really important. If there's no benefit to your partners, they will not join in. So this is the first question that you have to be able to address. What is the benefit for everyone else who's expected to join in? But the problem for academics is if you live in the system that is very demanding in terms of research output in very specific ways, you tend to have problems at some point. So, and I'm happy to come back to that in the discussion if you like. So, this is the book that Andreas mentioned. I just try to really put into words in German. I don't always do research in participatory ways, so I'm not a missionary. I don't want to convince any of you. On the contrary, I love the diversity of research approaches that we have, and I'm very fond of valuing each approach for what it allows you to do, and at the same time being aware of the limitations. So I was asking myself, when do I describe something as participatory research? And I do so when the research is really based on a collaboration where you do have partners who are co-researchers with decision-making power in ideally all phases of the process, even though it's important and to note that not everyone wants to participate with decision-making power in all phases, So you have to be flexible and understand that participation is a dynamic process with more or less happening at different phases, and you have to be attentive to who wants to participate with what power at what point in time. So the second point is that it's not just about research, it really is about the process of engaging in learning, empowerment, capacity building. And the second point is that in epistemological terms, this type of approach really tries not to just understand reality, but intervene and change it at the same time. This is a very interesting discussion, and I hope to come back to it at the other keynote later today. So looking forward to that. However, as you all know, there's so much work on participation. It's now this buzzword that is, in every, in a lot of funding from BMBF, in a lot of communal funding, you have to do it. And you really wonder sometimes what's behind it and if it's just a rhetoric or not. And this is something that actually was noted very early on, in this case by Sherry Arnstein, who engaged in citizen participation in basically urban development in the 60s and 70s in the US. And she said there's a critical difference between going through the empty ritual of participation and having the real power needed to affect the outcome of the process. So this is a stern reminder that we shouldn't just, call it participation, but it really is quite a task. And this is what I'm going to talk about, the problems, not because I want to devalue the approach, but I just want to be real about the difficulties it entails. And one of the difficulties as a social scientist working in sociology is that you really have to pay attention to social inequality as a factor of life and as something that you cannot just simply ignore when you try to invite people, come, join, we do something together, right? And then you as a sociologist, you're quite aware that independent of your intentions, social inequalities are reproduced through many different structural and interactional components. So this is what I want to talk about first, and this is why I called my talk "Good Intentions Won't Suffice." So very early on in the US, the participatory health research, CBPR and health research, has been funded on a larger scale. So they had a chance to really try it out. And this was an early review by Viswanathan and colleagues, and they said, well, local people's participation in research in terms of like joining in, right, does not guarantee that power and resources will be shifted to them, because research partnerships cannot be entirely horizontal. Complete equity is constrained by community norms, institutional inertia, and internalized expectations that allow the more powerful participants, however well intended, to determine what level of participation at what stage is most valuable for whom. And this basically really draws our attention to some of the patterns of interaction that really people, and including myself, are not always aware of. Yeah, so there's a privilege that is embedded in the way I speak, the way I carry a title, the way I address others or are addressed by others, and this is, I think, a very very insight. And we have this problem actually built into, it's a dilemma that we cannot resolve. It's built into the approach. Barbara Israel and colleague, they say, well, CBPR is particularly aimed not towards working with the police or with pharmaceutical company or so. No, it's aimed towards working with marginalized communities, i.e. those groups that are not heard enough in the discourse as yet, that suffer from inequalities and oppression. So with communities whose members experience limited access to resources and decision-making power, which is why we share the power that we have in science to actually learn together and have them frame the debate instead of actually framing it as a white German academic. But South African colleagues, Kelly and van Vlenderen, they say, well, the conditions which give rise to the need for participatory methodology are quite the opposite of ideal dialogical conditions. And this is, I think, something that we really have to come to terms with when we are trying to work in participatory ways with communities that are less privileged and so far have not the same access to resources and power. The second one that I want to share now, the empirical example, was in my experience the corona pandemic, and this is how I came to being more interested in also digital tools as part of the collaborative participatory endeavor. And I want to just share some information on the project. It was called Empower. It was funded by the DFG, which is quite unusual for the DFG to fund participatory research. In this case, they did because we were part of a research group, and I can use the tool again, PHLens. Larger research group on refugee health by Oliver Razum and Kevan Bozakmer. And this is these were our partners. We were, GEDA was in Berlin, and Landesvereinigung für Gesundheit und Akademie für Sozialmedizin. GEDA is a small community-based group of African migrants working for migrant health, mainly in Berlin, but elsewhere. They're called Global Empowerment and Development Association. So a very strong community partner with long established ties in the communities, especially African communities in Berlin. The Landesvereinigung in Hanover was this, they fund and organize any kind of grassroots, community-based health promotion efforts, projects, initiatives in Hanover and the region. And in Munich, we worked with Refugio Munich, which is like a provider, providing psychotherapeutic support to refugees suffering from trauma, and they were interested to work in a more community-oriented and participatory way. Now, these were our aims, and you see it has nothing to do on the first side with digital tools. We wanted to really understand, explore, support refugee communities in those locations in a participatory and community-based manner. We wanted to develop health promotion, that's the practical outcome, for and with refugees, and we wanted to understand concepts such as vulnerability, othering, and empowerment, how refugees experience them and view them and interpret them. So that was a theoretical outcome that we were aiming for. And how did we now realize participation? We were working in these three sites, creating first local working groups where community partners established a kind of team. They got resources for community participation. Each site got about 30,000 euros to spend for whatever project they seemed and deemed important and relevant in this broader framework of health promotion with and for refugees. But health promotion is a very broad project. You can address anything from work, education to quality of air in the neighborhoods, to HIV, to anything. We also got these three sites in contact with each other through workshops and working groups, so cross-site activities. We also enabled shared decision-making in terms of leading the project. We had a steering group made up of 6 community partners and 3 academic partners who, from the second project year onwards, made all the large decisions about how to spend the money, what to do, what to organize, what kind of outputs to aim for. And we had an advisory, we had an advisory board, and they were quite happy not to have shared decision-making power, but just to basically advise us. So they were fantastic, made of activists, researchers, refugee community organizers, and we used participatory methods, some of which I'm going to try to share. How am I doing with time, Andreas?
I think you're 20 minutes.
Into my talk, or?
Into your talk.
Okay, so 10 more minutes.
10 to go.
So the pandemic really affected us. It started in Germany with the public health measures, limiting social encounters, mobility, and so on. It started in March, if you remember, 2020, and we had started the project a few months before, November 2019. So it was really affecting us in very, very intense ways. It affected our community partners who were, for example, still living in shelters. They were under a lot of heavy quarantine measures. The migrant communities and support structures were heavily affected by the pandemic, and also our collaboration in the project. And we did focus groups trying to really document and think about these influences of the corona pandemic. And this is what you see there in the back. It's publications that are in the pipeline. So now this is the site in Munich where we did a photo voice project at the beginning. Anna Huber did that with the community partners, and they shared, for example, down here, how they lived in Munich. As some of you might know, in Bavaria there's these large shelters called Ankerzentren, where hundreds and thousands of refugees are housed in the first months of their stay in Germany, and the conditions are really bad. So you don't have access to a kitchen, so the people are basically cooking food under really horrible conditions next to their bed and are being sanctioned for it. And mothers had great difficulties, understanding, finding place to go with their children, especially because the shelters are very limited in space. And because the photo voice stories, I hope you're familiar, photo voice is when you have, as a group, people make pictures of their everyday life, they bring it back, and then you engage in discussions about it. So you have people narrate a story about the picture, why they made it, what is depicted in it, what's not depicted in it, and then the group joins in and they think about whether or not this reflects some of a joint and collective interest or problem of theirs. So the shelters were a real problem that our community partners identified in Bavaria, which is why they decided to do a peer survey, to not just basically discuss it in their group of about 15 community partners, but to have other refugees join into the knowledge project, so to say, through a survey. So not with decision-making power, but through participation in a survey. And we're about to publish the data soon. In Hanover, and this is what I want to focus on, there was a group of women from Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Yemen, and this here you can see this is Mariam Mohammadi. She was a key person in this project. She's fantastic. She's a really wonderful community organizer and a refugee woman herself, and she got other women together, and then they couldn't meet because of Corona. They couldn't go to the shelters, so they established social media tools, networks through WhatsApp. They created 2 WhatsApp groups where refugee women could exchange experiences, help each other, also raise questions concerning health and access to the healthcare system. But also they shared videos about what to do, how to play with your child when you're have to stay at home and you can't go to the playground and so on. So down here you have Nazanin, one of the women in the group, showing how to wear a mask, and they created over 38 videos, small videos, and really opened up this space for refugee women to help each other as well. So while they initiated it, this group of 5 refugee women in the local working group, over the course of the month, over 100 refugee women participated in either the Arabic or the Dari language WhatsApp group, and became more active. So they not only asked questions, but gave answers and just exchanged very everyday life information, which actually improves health in very ordinary everyday life ways. Maybe in the discussion we can also talk about the limitations of WhatsApp groups, because of course from an academic point of view I had concerns about data protection and so on, but at the same time that was the technology that the women used. It worked, and they did it. So it worked, and the women, especially Mariam is also working with the Flüchtlingsrat, so a migrant refugee organization, and she's really well connected in Hanover. And some of the women who are part of these groups, they basically learned to trust her and the others, and not in those groups, so not on those WhatsApp groups, but in bilateral conversations afterwards. They shared information such as experiencing violence, domestic violence by their partners, which is a real big problem that women, not just women, but also women experience violence not only before they migrate and on the migration routes, but also post-migration. So, and then they are in a situation as an asylum seeker in Germany, you don't know where to turn to. Can you go to the police? Can you get help? Where can you get help? And you don't trust German authorities because you're dependent on them for giving you and your family a permit to stay. So it's a really, really difficult situation. And this peer support structure, which was digitally supported, but not entirely happening through these WhatsApp groups, it was the combination of analog and digital that made it work so well, was a real success story. The Empower group, just quickly, they were more concerned with basically asking very basic questions. How can we justify doing participatory projects for 3 years in a field that is so under pressure and so disempowered in so many ways? So they were our They were raising a lot of very, very valid post and decolonial critique points in our discussions. So what did we learn? We learned that the pandemic acted as a magnifying glass for inequalities. For example, our community partners we were all affected by social distancing and so on, but they were actually in those shelters, they were quarantine measures for weeks on end. Yeah, so not just 1 week, but 2 or 3, and again and again and again. And our community partners didn't have a home office like we did. Yeah, very often they didn't even have headphones. We had to buy headphones so that they could connect through their mobile devices, through the Zoom meetings. But even then, they didn't have a space to have privacy and engage in the discussion. So it was really, really difficult for the community partners to really join into our research activities when Corona was affecting us in such strong ways. And the whole issue of lack of trust really came to the forefront, and that's one of the interests that I bring for the discussion to talk with you about. But we also saw that we can't just talk about, oh, now it's gone.
You just invert commercials all the time.
Help me. So we were interested, as you might remember, in vulnerability and empowerment, and this example from Hanover showed it clearly. You have many aspects of vulnerability that characterize the situation of refugee women in Germany in these shelters at the point in time. But you also have a potential for empowerment. So it was exactly refugee women who created a peer support network and used digital means when they couldn't meet people face to face. So I think that's a really beautiful, complex example where vulnerability and empowerment really interlaced. And we also felt supported and thought it was a really good decision to make, to not just, because we realized we cannot proceed as planned. And then we said, well, let's look at our situation, not in terms of autoethnography, but a little bit like that, to make our situation the subject of our research. We did not just peer research, but participatory focus groups, where also the academic team was moderated by community partners. And we cultivated spaces for reflexivity, including reflection labs, which were digital spaces for academic partners. And this is an open access article that you're happy to read. And this is my last slide. So pros and cons of participatory methodologies. They are really, really, how to put it now? They are a really good idea, especially when groups are very disempowered. But when you have, for example, refugees in Germany who are disempowered in so many ways, you have to be really careful what you can offer. And I believe that it is more important to really establish participatory, collaborative partnerships first, before also engaging in research that is connected to expectations to come up with an academic output within 3 years. That just wasn't possible, and it had a lot to do with Corona, but it also had a lot to do with the disempowerment that community partners experienced, the distrust they had towards us, also as white German academians who benefit for their career from this cooperation. So the persistency of power inequality was a real important issue that I took home from that project, despite my best intentions. But there are countermeasures that we can use, and one is resources. This is what the community partners always underlined and emphasized, and they said they really loved it that they could decide what to spend those 30,000 on. It was just 30,000 per site, but it's more than nothing. Critical self-reflexivity, especially among the privileged partners, but everyone has to be open to learning. This term of cultural humility, I'm not familiar, I don't know if you're familiar with that. It comes from social work, from healthcare research, but also social work. It's a really, I think, helpful concept. And what I wanted to learn from you about is the issue of trust in digital communications, not just in situations of forced migration, but other situations of disempowerment too, when you have people with very unequal access to power and privilege, and then you have a space that is meant for all of them. How do you create safe spaces? that where people feel safe to open up, where people want to go to. So we've made some experiences, but I'm really looking forward to learning from you, and thank you for your attention.